And I believe we're live. Um, Hi, everyone out there, and welcome to the Penzler Publishers Spotlight, new series that we're going to be doing here at the Mysterious Bookshop. I'm Charles Perry. I'm the publisher of Penzler Publishers, home of Mysterious Press, Scarlet, and American Mystery Classics imprints. And this is all done kind of in the offices of the Mysterious Bookshop, so we think of ourselves as the in-house publishing company for the store. And so I'm very happy to be here with two authors of recent titles on our list. We've got Scott Shepard, author of Should I Fall, and Debbie Babitt, the author of, oh my gosh, First Victim. So two terrific authors, kind of diverse styles of mystery and crime writing represented among their books. So I think we'll have a lot to talk about. I'll just start by introducing each and then let you guys talk a little bit about the book. So Scott Shepard is a writer and screenwriter and showrunner who's worked in the past on shows such as Miami Vice and The Equalizer, and whose debut mystery was published last year by Mysterious Press, The Last Commandment, which is recently new in paperback. Should I Fall is his newest. It's the second in his series that was begun in the last, but it can be read totally as a standalone, I promise, and enjoyed in that way. And then Debbie Babitt is the author of First Victim. Her debut came out from Scarlet last year. That was titled Saving Grace, more of a Southern Gothic set in the Ozarks. The new one is a legal thriller set here in New York City and surrounding areas. And Debbie also had a career as a writer, copywriter, and playwright before turning to novel writing. So whoever, Scott, why don't you start us off and tell us a little bit more about Should I Fall?
Thanks, Charles, for having us too, and so nice to share the space with Debbie, whose book I read and loved, and we're going to talk about it. Yeah, so like you say, Should I Fall is the sequel or the follow-up, let's say even more so, to The Last Commandment. And it was one of the things that I really wanted to do. And thank you for saying that, Charles. I really wanted it to operate as a standalone that, very quickly within 2 pages, you could enjoy and see what you needed to know to read, this book. And then hopefully if you haven't read the first one, you go back and read it. And if you've, or if you read the first one, you'll like see what happened to the characters. And what it really is about, it's about 3 characters. It's about, in this case, it's about just a retired Scotland Yard commander named Austin Grant, whose last case was chronicled in the first book, and he is retired. And what has happened is that he's been reunited with his long lost, his daughter, who he's estranged with, who's a reporter in New York, who's happened to fall in love with a New York cop that he met on his last case in the first book. And this book picks you up now that this book starts with Rachel, who is his daughter, and John Frankel, who is the New York cop. And they are about to get married in 10 days from the start of the book. In the prologue, back in London, the same place that her deceased mother got married and her father got married. And the book starts with that she's going to go, she's about to go to London to join her retired father to plan for the wedding. And she's picked up the wedding rings and a wedding gift of cufflinks that she's going to give to her betrothed. And she goes into his apartment to leave them in his luggage, knowing he'll join her a week later and he'll be surprised. She lets herself into his apartment because, of course, she has a key, into his studio apartment, and there, lying dead on the floor, shot to death, is a woman she's never met, but she's heard about, which is his ex-wife, who's suddenly appeared and is dead in his apartment. And the book takes on from there to where John becomes the primary suspect. And what it becomes is the man she married who she thinks he is? What is this all about? Did he do this? And of course, instead of just making wedding plans, it's her and her father suddenly he has a case that is very personal to him that him and his daughter are going to figure out, is try and get to the bottom of this, and is he the man who they think he is? And that's what the book's about. And it gallivants all over the place.
Thank you for that. And Debbie, could you give us a little bit of insight into First Victim?
Sure. And by the way, Scott, I loved your book, and I'm going to the first book next.
Good. Well, so that's exactly what I want to happen.
Well, First Victim is a suspense novel. It is not a series, so you've never met the characters before, but you will meet Judge Alice McCarty, who's presiding over a murder trial. And something about this trial has been getting to her, and she's not sure if it's her private life. She has a lot of stress at home with her husband and daughter, and she's trying to figure out what's going on because she's starting to unravel. At the same time, her daughter has begun a search for her birth father, unbeknownst to Alice. But that's not the only secret Alice is keeping. So Alice's secret, and not to give away anything here, and Alexis's search for her father takes Alice to a tiny town in North Country, way, way upstate in New York, where she's finally going to have to confront her past, and she's going to have to choose between justice and revenge. And it's narrated from the point of view of the Honorable Alice D. McCarty, her daughter Alexis, and Alice's girlhood friend Connie. So it's a suspense novel. It's into setting. I feel like I can't say too much more about the book, except that Alice is faced with a major, major choice. And what makes it even harder for her is that she's a judge. And so it's going to test her limits as a judge, a woman, and a mother. And that's First Victim, and people can figure out, well, who is the first victim in this book? Very different from my first book, which took place in the South, as Charles said. So that's First Victim.
Thank you. And actually, preparing for this broadcast, I was thinking about ways that these two books are very different. Scott's book is kind of a chase novel, this kind of classic form of mystery where the action begins on page 1 and you kind of race through the pages till the end. Whereas Debbie, your book's more suspenseful, deeply developed characters with, their past traumas and all coming to bear on the present. So I was thinking about ways that those two books are distinguished not only by narrative, but by style. And one thing that is a striking difference is point of view. I mean, you, Debbie, in your books, you like to move between several characters and perspectives to kind of show actions and events from multiple perspectives. Whereas Scott, your books are a little bit more straightforward in terms of the perspective, third person generally. So
right, yeah, definitely not even the third person. But I will say what I so enjoyed about Debbie's book is I did do the same thing because I have these three characters, and so it was always third person, and but I did use those. I would alternate between those three characters, in terms of the same thing, which gives you're not trapped that way, right? But at least lets you go somewhere else.
Well, that's also interesting in that and you've seen this more lately, in how typical mystery is the first person. Usually it's first person and you're following the detective along. And then books, in the last couple of years, we'd have a first person main character and then third person other characters, which has been done to great effect. The first person could be the detective or the killer. And I actually had my main character in first person in my mind originally, and that the others were in third. So it's kind of interesting, the perspectives, what makes how it's different when it's first versus third person.
Yeah, I admire anybody. Look, with I see all those books and the thousands of books I have, and most of them are thrillers and mysteries.
Right.
And I've known Otto for decades, and I used to come to the bookshop when it was up on 56th Street. And we would talk about all these classic. I think it's so great, Charles. You guys are, reissuing the old classic mysteries, and how many of them, Philip, whether it's Philip Marlowe, Lou Archer, the first person was always great. I've always felt frightened to write in the first person because I'm sort of saying you have to really create that person, right? Because you know you can't hide behind the narrative because it's got to be what they say, right? And I think the only time I've ever done it so far is in my first book. I had one. I got to the last section, and I alternated with a journal that was written in the first person. That's as far as I've gotten. So I really admire the fact that you've been able to do it. It also allows you in the third person. You can play. You know, you can play a little fast and loose, right? You know.
Yes, and also you can go to settings the first person can't go to. So in the typical old style defense mysteries, you're following the detective and you're learning along with them. But if you go into other people's heads that the detective doesn't know about, and then you can go to other settings, it really frees you up that way. And then it's like the Hitchcock, where we have knowledge of a character that other characters don't have about that character. Right. So I love doing that. You can do that in books too. And I think readers like to know things, but then they're reading and saying, well, I know what this character knows, but this character doesn't know it. So it can get a little schizophrenic.
Well, you know, the thing about that is, you know, like you said, the Hitchcock reference is always great. And I talk about this with the TV writers that I work with and the shows I've run. And I also have been teaching, you know, for about 7 years, I was teaching out in Texas at UT, the grad program. And I always said, you know, it's that classic Hitchcock, you know, the whole Hitchcock story about the bomb in the room and the two guys.
Right.
And, you know, it was always like, there's the thing where you have two guys talking about baseball for 5 minutes, then kaboom, the bomb goes off and you hit the ceiling. But Hitchcock's way was show the bomb go under the table, have the two guys come in, you go, no, don't talk about baseball. It's like the bomb's gonna go.
How about in North by Northwest when Cary Grant's trying to drop the note down so Eva Marie Saint will see it, but James Mason won't. And we know this, and he doesn't. So it's interesting when you do it in a book as well.
And look, you know, one of the things, you know, that the trick of the thing, what, you know, the great thing is writing novels, and it's harder in television, is that you can sort of do exactly what we're talking about. But if you're clever enough, you can think they know everything, but they don't. You know, like literally, you're showing a perspective, you read it, you go, oh, I know what's coming. And then when you get to the penultimate or the ultimate moment, you go, yeah, it is that. But oh my God, it's this too, you know?
Right,
right. I mean, I have to even say that I don't think, because it's like you mentioned her daughter and husband, I don't know if it was purposeful. Maybe I wasn't reading carefully, but Charlie, right? You know, right?
Charles, yes.
Charles. Oh, but I think that it was Charlie early on, right?
No, don't say anything.
Okay.
No,
but I'm sorry, I'm sort of saying whatever. When you look at that, right? But I'm saying
that was you think Charles is somebody else,
right?
Charles, different Charles.
Right? No, but I'm saying, but to me, that's what, and I'm going like, oh, I fell for that. That's good.
I know, but you see, I love reversals. I talk about this, you know, in the movie. I love the movie Rebecca, all the old movies and all the old. Right. So I hope it's not a spoiler for anyone who hasn't read it.
I apologize. Also, that is, but you do reveal that like on page 15.
So when Florence Libby, Joan Fontaine, the unnamed heroine, goes through the whole movie.
Right.
He misses his wife and she can't live up to her. And then he says, I know you loved her. And he says, loved Rebecca. I hated her. And then everything turns on its head. That's what I love.
Well, you know, yeah. And I won't talk about the ending of it, but just talk about classic. Go read Murder of Roger Ackroyd, Agatha Christie, right? Get to the end of that and go like, well, was that fair or not? Well,
I know, right? I know. It's the only book she ever wrote like that. I know. But I love, that's why we're in this field. I love this stuff.
Well, I mean, you think about all her classic plots, you know, you can recite 10 of them, whether it's, you know, and then there were Untitled Indians, ABC Murders, Murder on the Orient Express, Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Those four alone she was the first to do what she did in those books, right? And we've all done versions of them 10 times over, you know.
Unbelievable, right? That's why she was what she was, and had detectives and series too. So there's a lot. If you have a detective everyone loves, that's it.
No, I apologize, Charles. We just hijacked the conversation.
Oh, we're sorry, Charles.
No, I did that. I started that to be.
Please.
Okay, so I don't know if we answered your question, or if you.
I don't remember what the question was.
No, you did. I mean, I did have a follow-up, which I don't know if we should return to, but we might as well because I don't have that many questions.
I think Debbie and I can keep going too. We'll be good.
Yeah. But I guess I was gonna say, I was wondering how that perspective, how your use of perspective in the books influenced the way that you craft the story. Like, do you start with the character and the perspective, and then build the story off of that place, or do you start with the story and then stick the characters in where they need to go, and so on?
Oh,
Debbie, you want to go first
I'll
with that?
jump in here because, and this is something I've talked about a lot because I have a friend, an author friend, she always starts with the twist and then builds out from there. From acting days, I always start with character. And you remember Konstantin Stanislavski, the great Russian director, he said character is action. So characters start talking to me, which is why in Saving Grace, she was an 11-year-old orphan in the South. And in First Victim, this woman was walking into the courtroom in her robes, and I figure she's the judge. So it always starts for me with character. They start talking to me. And then, of course, once they start to reveal their worlds, and I'm in the thriller genre and psychological suspense, then I have to craft the story, which is almost harder because I could just stick with the character talking to me, but things are happening that they're telling me about. So for me, it starts with character and setting. And then from there, from what they're telling me, I sort of get a sense, not to sound too mystical, I sort of get a sense of what the story is. Like in Grace, girls disappearing. In First Victim, a murder trial she's presiding over in her past. So the world reveals itself to me, and then I have to see where it takes me and work out all the logistics and research. Have to do research too. So that's how I start with character and voice.
Yeah, it's funny because because this was a follow-up to the first one. I mean, and The Last Command was an idea I had for a long time. I thought of making it into a movie, and I just never got to it because of all my TV work and everything else I was doing. So I had these three characters, and then when I said I'm going to write a follow-up because people liked the first one, and I really enjoyed writing it. What happened to them next? And I'm going, okay, if you read this, these, Grant's daughter and this cop fall in love. And I'm kind of going like, okay, so what's the next thing? And I'm going like, okay, well, I want to see them approach married life. And it's funny. It's like his ex-wife is barely mentioned in the first book. And it's like, maybe how my mind sort of works is like, what the story was that, his ex-wife ran off with somebody, the superintendent, left him high and dry a few years before. He was brokenhearted. And I originally had them running away to the Caribbean and setting up like and then right before I gave the book and the manuscript to, Otto and Charles a few years ago, I said, you know what, I'm going to just have them run off to Hawaii. I don't know why. I knew why, because we go to the big island of Hawaii a lot and we love it there. We've been there, a couple dozen times where we kind of go on vacation, my wife and I. And I said, who knows? So then I remember being on an airplane at some point thinking, suddenly like, okay, here's an interesting, what if that ex-wife came back and died in his apartment? So I said, well, that would start these characters having to deal with something. And then I kind of realized and the reason I said, oh, good, now I can have Grant and his daughter go to Hawaii, and I can write about Hawaii. So that's where that came from. But the interesting thing and maybe it's all the plotting from television and reading all these thousands of books. That's all I knew going into this book. I didn't know who killed her. I didn't know how or why. I just said, this is a cool thing. And like you say, Debbie, I said, here's the one thing. It's like, I figured Frankel had to know why she was there.
Right.
And I didn't really know, but I got to say, I knew my character had to know more than he was telling. And so as I wrote I figured it all out as I went along, right. I mean, literally. And I just and I do believe, yes, that came out of me kind of realizing what characters are did, in television. We write a different way. You kind of have to know a beginning and you got to kind of know an ending because you're pumping them out every week or two to get them out there. And so to me, I had a friend of mine. I worked on a show called The Dead Zone, the Stephen King thing. And the man who created it was a guy named Michael Piller. Was a really wonderful writer, and and he created that and a few other shows. And he used to say that what he would do is that he would say, I would literally write a scene and figure out what my character would tell me what to do next. And I'm going, and in TV, it's kind of hard to do that. You don't have the time to go do that. I got to figure out what he would do next to get to that ending. I got to get to an hour from now. Right. In writing books, I found out you could do that, literally. Yeah. And then the really interesting thing is, my friend Karen Slaughter is a terrific, writer. Once said to me, she says, yeah, that's the way I do it. And then I think, what is the screwiest thing that they would do next that would make sense? But, and I thought, oh, that's a really interesting thing.
That's interesting, yeah.
And the other thing I also thought about plotting is the way I've always plotted. I kind of know the start and maybe I know the ending. And I'm kind of going like I've always told television writers and writers, it's like a maze. Here's the start, here's the end, right? And I'm going like, okay, so you know where the start is, here's the end. I don't solve a maze like this I saw maybe I start here, then you go to the ending, and you kind of work your way. And
Right.
the more you start from the start, but you're filling the ending and then the middle. But once you know that way, instead of just going this way, you go this way and this way. And that's the way I but it becomes through character plotting for novels, which is very different than the way I've done it in television for,
Yeah, you have so much more time. Because I write drafts and drafts, and I talk into this recorder, which isn't even the writing yet because it has to go down the arm. So I was at Rex Reader said it has to go down the arm through the fingers. Anyway, I do that, and I do tons of ideas come to me, and I don't, those programs where it appears on the screen. I can't do that because as I input, other thoughts and ideas come to me. So I have thousands of pages before I ever sit down, which is why TV, you'd have to go so fast. And then when I sit down, other things happen that I didn't expect, which is a reason it's very hard for me to stick to a synopsis or outline.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was writing, television. We wrote outlines. We write outlines all the time. I've written every one of these novels I've written without an outline.
Yeah.
Something because you find that. But I also found, and Charles, obviously we know a lot of writers from our lives. And Charles, how many writers you work with and know? It's amazing how everybody's processes are different, but some things are the same. And to me, I so admire writers who write every day. They sit down and they're disciplined. I'm not one of these people that sit down going like, well, I got to write something today, and I just can't stand looking at the blank screen. And again, back to television and movies, one of the greatest writers ever, Billy Wilder, used to say,
God, I love
greatest maybe screenwriter ever, right? Used to say when he sat down at the typewriter, it was written. And to me, I always would go like, I'm always writing in my head. What are you working on? And every time I tell it out loud. And I talk a lot, and it's my voice trying to catch up with my head. So by the time I sit down, I might not have it all caught up in the middle, but at least I know where I'm going to start.
Yeah.
Robert Caro, is he the one who writes the LBJ books? He once said a really great thing. He says, I need to go to sleep knowing one thing. I need to know what the first line is the next day. And I'm going that as long as I have that. And so sometimes I'll work and then I'll go like, don't write the first part of the chapter, know what it is. So you don't have that panic when you get up in the morning where I can't do this. I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, I tend to think about it at night. It's like a discipline. And I find if I think about it at night, I wake up thinking about it. Like even just before this morning, I was trying to work out a plot twist that a lot of characters, a lot of stuff's happening. So I took my recorder and I went into Central Park and I'm talking into it and trying to, then I'll input it later and then I'll come up with other things. And sometimes I feel like it's a game of Clue. Like I could write a book so many different ways. It could go in so many directions and have so many different endings. And I write many drafts for that reason until I come up, I could probably, when the book's done, write another draft because that's just, I don't know. This genre really gives you a lot of leeway because it's suspense, it's a thriller, you can't dawdle, but yet you can work out the plot and make sure it's all filled in and fit and goes to the next stage.
Well, I've been writing, for, on and off and really good friends with a really great writer. And we've been doing pilots together now. A guy named Dan Pine. We started our careers together. He's a big movie writer. He's written novels himself. Yeah. And we've stayed friends and we read each other's novels first. He's written a lot of big movies, but we've been working again together in our older age and selling stuff. And he sort of said, Scott finds, character through structure and Dan finds structure through character. But together we want the same thing, which is really, which is really interesting, right? And I do find, though, that ultimately I realize, and especially with novels, but even those older doing television, it really all does come through character. I mean, the show we're doing, we have a show coming on in the next month that we just finished working on the last 7 months that we took over called Monarch. It's going to be on Fox. It was interesting. We came in to take it over 4 or 5 episodes in, and my buddy who ran it and asked me to come help him, we had installed, it starts, the first thing is like, literally we added this sort of flash forward. It's the first scene in the show where a character, Trace Atkins, the country singer, goes and grabs a rifle, goes somewhere and ends up shooting somebody after saying something. You don't see who he shoots, and then it suddenly says 3 months earlier, and we start there, right? And I said, great, that's really cool, that really helped the show. And he goes, yeah. I go, so who did it? He goes, I don't know. I'm saying, who did he kill? He goes, what do you do? He goes, I don't know. Why do you do it? I don't know. He says, what do I think I need you for? And it's like, but we had that hook. And we went back and forth as to who did it and who's over the months, but it was always like which character would make sense. And I did another show like that. And I think what's really helped from the novel plotting and reading, it is all through character. You got to come up with a hook, but you want to make sure characters do something that makes sense. Because we find I remember we actually pitched to the network who we thought was a really good version. They go, no, that you can't have that person do it. We like that person too much. We're going, I'm going, but they would do it. It's like literally.
I always think of characters you like, and I think of Psycho. Here you think Lee is the star, and she gets killed off, and that's that's so amazing. And she's not it's like following a protagonist, and then it's not that protagonist.
That is the great thing about that movie. That's what's so wonderful about that movie, right? It's two things. One, like you say, Janet Leigh was the star. People didn't know who Tony Perkins was, and she's and you literally see, that suddenly 30 minutes of the movie she's gone, and then the movie just keeps going. You're going, did I imagine what I just saw? Or
was she there? Yeah. But what's interesting too, what you were saying about what you had in the pilot shoot, that's like what you can do in a prologue in a thriller. Right. You have something happen, like doing First Victim, and then the book catches up to it at some point.
Exactly. I mean, that's what's so great is, that first page of your thing basically says, okay, when am I going to come back to this?
Right. And you don't know what it means, and nothing's what it seems, and sometimes it's the opposite of what you're seeing. I like that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's always what it has to be at the end of the day. You might pull a trick on them, but they got to sort of go like, it has to really be fair at the end.
Yes, and organic and integrated. Absolutely. It's almost like the reader can't be too far behind you or too far ahead of you. It can't come out of left field. But they shouldn't have seen it coming. So once it happens, they say, aha, of course. They might even go back and look through, for some of the clues and stuff.
And I've always sort of said, it's like, doing what we do. I mean, I kind of figure my wife, it's really irritating to watch a movie with me because I can't help shut up going, oh, that's going to happen. And we're right more often than not. And I'm kind of going like, when somebody's read the first book or now reading the second book, they go, oh, I figured it out. I'm going, great. It doesn't, if everybody did, but somebody told me like, if you fool 80% of the people you're doing your job, you want 10 or 20% to figure it out because you used to play fair. Talk about classic mysteries growing up as a kid. And I know you guys are fans of the Ellery Queen books. That was the classic.
Oh my God. Every one of them was in my house.
Well, and then, and they always issued that challenge to the reader, and they were the most, and I think there was the first 8 to 10 books. And I think of those first 9 or 10 books, I think I figured out one. Yeah. And I was so proud of myself. And Ellery Queen would always say, you have every clue. And you're going like,
that's pretty impressive, Scott.
Yeah,
1 out of 10. I think
that's pretty good.
The other nine I didn't get. But you go those. They were so complicated. But at the end of the day, you're saying it was all there.
All there in plain sight, all in front of you. That's the best thing when with the person or whatever it was there all along.
I mean, not that I feel like at this point, but one of these things is, but with the satisfaction when you see it all coming together.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, I actually will try not to say what the ending to this is, but The Sixth Sense is 30 years ago. Right. Most people know what the big twist of that movie is, but I won't say it for the two people who haven't seen it. But I remember seeing the ads for that movie and went and saw it what the first day it was. I looked at the ads, and it's the way my mind works. I said, this is what I think it is, right? This movie's about. And I watched the movie, and I got to have that experience that everybody who watched it the second time had, which is like when you get to the end of it, or if you go to Planet of the Apes, right? If you know what the ending of these movies are and you watch it through those eyes, from the get-go, because you know what it is,
right?
You're going like, you're right, because it's all there, right? And to me, that's what like that Ellery Queen thing. If you're following it, there should be a thrill as the reader who likes these kind of puzzles that, you know what? You see how clever, hopefully, the writer's trying to be and that you figured it out. There's nothing wrong with that. If you fooled everybody, then it's like you're going, ha ha, I'm that much smarter than you. And no, we read these books because we enjoy them and they want to sit with you.
Right. Well, it's funny because I read an article last year that said, well, we all know writing thrillers is really a cheat because it's all about the author withholding information. Like, someone will say in that secret, we know what happened back then, and she's talking to someone, but they're not going to talk about what it was. First of all, they don't need to, but second of all, it would ruin it for everyone. So we all know it's about withholding information that certain characters may have.
That's
literature, and that's not only thrillers. That's just everything. That's
everything, right?
Look, the thing we all know. I mean, when I was back at Stanford years and years ago, I taught I was the first person ever. I got to teach when I was an undergraduate for 2 years, like 6 times. I created a course in the detective novel. And I got, you could actually do this, Stanford reviewer. And I got this the head of the Victorian literature department, was the one that had to sponsor you. And he's a brilliant scholar. And we all said is that the first murder mystery, the first murder mystery might be Bleak House, it's Dickens, but every great novel has some mystery aspect into it, not necessarily a death or a murder, because you have to reckon with something. So it's like Charlie says, it's literature completely. What is kind of cool, I was reading a book by a friend of mine, like a month ago, rereading it. I'd forgotten the ending, and then there was a big reveal at the end. I went, God, it's like, oh, that person they referred to his name was Mike. I'm going, but most of the time it's his last name. Now the great thing is I went and I also I read books like obviously and I had a Kindle version of this too, and I was able to run the search, and I'm going, how many times? And I'm going, well, he did say the real name 3 times, but it went right over my head, because I wasn't looking at it in that context. So you got to play fair.
It's always the secrets. There's always a past. I mean, it's all literature, everything. Right. Of course, the secrets of human nature and behavior.
All right, just to switch gears slightly, I had another question about your 2 books. Well, one thing that strikes me is that they both at least begin in New York City. So I was curious about, what role the city played in the books. I mean, as a resident of New York, that interests me personally. But also, I think the way that setting works in both books is very different. I mean, Debbie, your book kind of moves back and forth between these 2 settings, one upstate and one in the city, but they're both deeply gone over, back and forth and deeply populated with, these traumas, these stories. Whereas Scott, yours is more quickly moving from one place to the next, which I wondered if that's, a machine of the plot or something like that. And so, yeah, if you want to talk a little bit about setting and what role it played,
Debbie, since you're from New York City and live there, why don't you start?
Well, it's interesting that my first book, as you know, was set in the Ozarks, and I've never been there, but that was the character talking to me. So then I had to do a lot of research because it was a small Baptist town, very rural town. So in the new book, I guess because I'm from New York, I live in New York most of the time, and my husband's a criminal defense attorney. My father was a federal judge, so the law is probably in my blood. I never wanted to go to law school, although my husband said it's more exciting to write about it. But I guess I felt that somehow this judge felt close to home for me. And maybe that's because the law is in my blood. And I love New York, and I find the criminal justice system and the New York courthouse fascinating place. I went down there. I sat in on some trials. That was pre-pandemic because they didn't have trials for quite a while. They couldn't have jurors wearing masks. But I spoke to court officers. I got to see judges' chambers. I got to. So I just thought New York seemed the right place to deal with justice, to deal with the law. And I just felt very comfortable because I didn't have to do as much research because it was New York City. And she's a big city judge. And I like the contrast of Saving Grace takes place in 2 different time periods, but in the same setting. First Victim takes place also 2 time periods, but 2 different settings. So I liked that upstate New York was a big contrast to the city. And I realized that much as I love the big city, there's something about small towns that calls to me because it feels very real to me when I get to I have woods in both books too. And something about the small town, maybe so many mysteries are set in small towns where everyone knows each other and everyone knows everyone's secrets. But there was something about having this big city judge in a small town that was very exciting to me. And it was where she was, she lived there for much of her girlhood. So it was a really interesting contrast to have this. I don't know that it would have worked as well if she were a small town judge living in North Country. So I think having this New York background where you can be more anonymous, it's a bigger population, it's just so different. And you can probably have more secrets than you can keep upstate. So in answer, and settings also become characters to me, always. Repentance in Saving Grace was very real to me. And also I use fictitious names. We'll get into that too, about why we use fictitious names or don't. But I just felt that something about the setting really called to me, both settings. And I guess New York, being a big town, being so anonymous, because you have so many places they go in the city, go all over. And I thought about that too, to have her go all over New York. And then again, there she was going upstate.
Right.
So I guess I would say there were 2 great contrasting settings for me.
It's funny because with, this book, and New York is sort of a home base for this book. I mean, because the first book, and the idea I originally had was a retiring, Scotland Yard cop Grant, ends up getting a case. His last case starts in London, moves to New York, and then it ends up going back to London. And he was going to get involved with this New York cop and reconcile with his daughter as they go into this, series of crimes. And to me, when I had that idea 30 years ago, it's just, I like the idea of two characters are polar opposites of each other, New York cop, London cop. And I'd spent a lot of time in New York. I mean, in fact, doing The Equalizer, and I met my wife in New York, even though we're both from here. And we love New York, and it's a very romantic, romanticized city. Like you think of what it looks like in Manhattan and so many other kind of movies like that. And I'd never been to London when I thought of that idea, but I idealize things about London because as a writer, it's a great writer's city, right? All the great writers.
Yeah.
And so the benefit of not turning to write that for almost 30 years was that, 2001, I went to London for the first time, and we've now been there 5 or 6 times. And it's one of my favorite cities in the world. So I had these two romantic cities that actually, like you say, became the fourth character in the book besides these. And to me, I also like the idea, like I talk, I don't like doing research. I like to make shit up, so I only do it when I have to do it. And I write glorified versions of stuff from my own life. I mean, the marriage proposal that is on page 2 of the new book, right, between Rachel and John, is the way I proposed to my wife. I mean, so you're always taking things and you're just saying, what can you write about in terms of that? And like I talked about Hawaii, well, New York was sort of that same sort of thing for me, in terms of doing that. And I joke with, my wife, because she goes, would they really check into that nice hotel like when they go like another level? There's something about it's a little wish fulfillment to me. I love books. Like I'm reading, like I'm reading Daniel Silva's books, right, which remind me of the Robert Ludlum books or the James Bond books. Those, to me, there's a reason like the Silva books, always start with they tell you the place he's at. I know purposely you do. It's like a travel log, there's something great about you that, if you haven't been to those places, you want to go to those places. So I've always written, like, there's a really cool scene I'm always very proud of the first time, one of the first times that John and Rachel kiss in the first book is on the London Eye, in the snow. And I just, because I'm an incurable, stupid romantic, and that's the thing I like about this book, because I think ultimately it's a sentimental book, and so to me, and I see New York as a place that is just, I've just romanticized it. So that's why I take places, walks in the park and all those places. But then, and so I've been to Hawaii a lot. Now, Maine is the other place that's in this book. I went there once, but I remembered it. And so I wrote about it, and that's what it is, I haven't written about here yet, though, which is really, I haven't written about, I'm saving that up. They'll show up here one day.
Okay.
And then kind of to round things off, because I think this should last about 45 minutes. We're at 37 right now. I would be interested just to hear about some of your influences with your writing, especially with these most recent books. I think that could be cool. And then, so let's hear it.
Well, for this particular book, again, because it starts with character, I don't know if I had influences, but it's probably subconscious because of the laws I was telling you about. And I used to love all the legal shows. I didn't miss a Perry Mason. I mean, I love the law. And I'd actually written a courtroom drama, a play. So I've always been interested in the law. So it may be that that's why this character came to me. But I thought she'd be a defense attorney. I really didn't think she'd be a judge. And I actually have an idea for a defense attorney. So I would say that all those great TV shows, all the great legal books, I love Thoreau, Presumed Innocent, I thought was amazing because it was a literary book. So I say in terms of this book, while it did start with character, I really think the law is probably in my blood. And I think it was just all the great legal authors. I mean, Michael Connolly, John Grisham. But I hadn't seen that many with female judges. So I thought that would be something interesting because she has to be an arbiter of justice, and it's about justice and revenge. So in this case, and then in terms of just my literary influences, any well-written book. I loved all Stephen King's early books. And I'm not really a fan of horror or the supernatural, but I think he writes great characters. So I would just say great writing. And in the case of this book, just all of my legal influences.
I mean, yeah. I mean, for me, I mentioned earlier, I mean, look, one of the two writers that have influenced me the most, in my life, they're all sitting here, is One is Ross Mcdonald, is one of the reasons I started writing, in terms of, and they're my favorite mystery books ever. And Stephen King is the other huge influence for me because I love all those, and the horror books, but he writes three kinds of books. He writes basically the horror books, and he's written my second book, and we've actually tried to turn it into a TV show as an apocalyptic western. My second book, and he has The Dark Towers, which he has those books, and then he's written things like Shawshank and Mr. Mercedes, which are much more grounded, right? And but his characters are great. And to your point, Debbie, one of my favorite recent books of his, and it's also it's 11/22/63, which is the one about the guy goes back in time, to try and stop to kill Kennedy. And you think that's what it's about. It is, but it isn't. It's really about a relationship, and it is so touching and so moving and so great. And I think that's the trick, in terms of doing that. So the other influence, I guess I was thinking about the books of detective books that I love, because it really was about as twisted as if you read the first book, it's really twisted and turny. There's murders and serial killer stuff, but it's really about, Rachel meeting, Franklin, but it's really about Grant and his daughter, and this book, to me, the reason the title, Should I Fall in Love with This Person? Right. It's about Franklin and Rachel and where they're headed. Should they be together, and what's the reasons for that? And the series of books that I loved, especially the first 5, were the Dennis Lehane books.
Oh my God.
The A.G. Patrick books, and most people are only familiar who haven't read his books. And it's a really good movie, is Gone Baby Gone.
I know. Excellent.
It's a great movie, but that book is like, it rips your heart out because you're so invested in the two of them. So I want you to be invested in John and Rachel, and I hope people who seem to like the book are. And so that's, I think, the other influence to me is to create, and going forward, which, and I'm planning on doing more with these and spin-offs of various things with these. I feel it's a world of characters, these 3 emotional characters. That's, and in terms of recent mysteries over the last 10, 15 years, that series of books I always kind of go back to because they're just so touching, Well,
I was thinking about relationships. The Shining is really about a father and a son. I mean, it's the father-son relationship.
Or it's a horror movie about writer block. Right. It's both. I agree, of course. Yeah.
Always, I think it's always about the relationships and the character, and those are the books that endure.
Yes, exactly.
Not I have this great twist, or I have this great and characters you want to return to, which is interesting about a series. So I was actually thinking of maybe doing a sequel to Saving Grace, because I left some loose ends. But if you can get readers to glom onto a character and really follow this character, they'll follow them anywhere, really. Right. So I find that really, really interesting. There's so many great books out there. Oh my God, we'll never have time to read them all.
Exactly, I know. And when I finally reread something, I kick myself going, really? You're going to waste your time doing this? Yeah, but I like that book.
I know. And when you reread, you learn new, or sometimes I forget. And my husband said, you just like to be surprised. Yeah. I'll say, I don't remember this was the killer. And I reread it.
Well, for all you readers at home, surely you should find the time to read Should I Fall and First Victim. 2 excellent new books. And I don't know. I feel like I could sit here and talk with you guys for another hour, but I do want to keep it, somewhat at a consumable length, so that folks, are left wanting more.
Oh, that's good, right? That's good.
So thank you so much for taking the time to do this, and thanks to the viewers out there for tuning in, whether you tuned in live or afterwards, because this event will be archived on our YouTube and Facebook pages. And yeah, I hope that you'll check out First Victim and Should I Fall. And thanks a lot.
Thank you. This was really great. Great to meet you, Scott. Great to see you, Paul.
Okay, yeah, thank you guys.
Too. We didn't even skim the surface, right?
No, really. Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care, guys. Nice to see you. Bye-bye.